Now, from CBS News Miami, this is Facing South Florida with Jim DeFede.
Welcome to Facing South Florida. I'm Jim DeFede. This has been one of the wildest weeks in politics. In the aftermath of the assassination attempt against former President Donald Trump, the Republicans held their convention in Milwaukee, and Trump chose Ohio Senator J.D. Vance to be his running mate. Vance is for a national abortion ban and does not believe there should be exceptions in cases of rape or incest. Nevertheless, throughout the convention, we were told the assassination attempt had somehow changed Donald Trump, and we would hear in his convention speech how he wanted to unify the country. And in the beginning, he did just that.
As Americans, we are bound together by a single fate and a shared destiny. We rise together or we fall apart. I am running to be president for all of America, not half of America, because there is no victory in winning for half of America.
But that lasted for about 15 minutes. The remaining 80 minutes of his speech was the same old Donald Trump. He devolved into the same angry, grievance-based rhetoric he gives at all of his campaign rallies, full of lies and misleading statements. Trump had a chance to guarantee a victory in November if he had just kept his speech to 30 minutes and struck the same unifying tone he did at the outset. Imagine what the conversation would be today if he admitted that he regretted some of the statements he has made over the years. Imagine if he had said he would be better because we all need to be better. But he couldn't do it. He just couldn't do it. Donald Trump is leading the race for the White House, but he is still a deeply flawed candidate, which is why so many Democrats want Joe Biden to step aside. Joe Biden has shown he cannot prosecute the case against Trump, and there is no way to convince his fellow Democrats, let alone independents and the rest of the country, that he is up to the job. Now, just before Trump gave his acceptance speech, I spoke to the head of the Republican Party of Florida, Evan Power, at the convention site in Milwaukee.
I have never seen more energy in a convention hall than I have for this one. People are unified and ready to take back their country. And you're seeing people after the events of last Saturday, that they know the mission in front of them of winning in November, and people are fired up.
And when you look at first off, also let me get you now to react to the selection of J.D. Vance. Obviously, I know you were hoping that Marco Rubio had been selected, but why do you think the former president decided on J.D. Vance instead of Marco Rubio?
Well, I think with J.D. Vance, you have a young conservative that fires up a base of voters that we need to fire up. People who come from rural America, from poverty. His story is incredible. And if you saw his speech when he delivered it for the vice presidential nominee speech, he hit on all the points that were important, which were the American dream is alive and well, and we need to continue to protect the ability for people to come out of poverty and to seek the vice presidential role or the presidential role out of poverty.
And remember, this is also a man who, these were his words, described Donald Trump as America's Hitler.
You're seeing many Americans who oppose Donald Trump, but now they see his record compared to the failed record of Joe Biden, and they realize that Donald Trump is fighting for everyday Americans. You're seeing a realignment of the parties. The Republican Party now is the party of working class Americans versus the elites that are trying to control who the nominee is. Is it Joe Biden today? Is it Kamala Harris tomorrow?
You know, I thought one of the most interesting moments of the convention so far has been the Teamster president speaking there at the convention, to the point that you're talking about working families. But I got to tell you, watching his speech, I don't know how well received it was in the convention hall, because he talked about the need for unions and trying to be more pro-union, and Donald Trump opposes, the minimum wage. There's a lot there that seems incongruous in terms of the messaging. And the Republican Party, certainly here in Florida and across the country, has not been very pro-union. What do you think? Why do you think the Teamster president was there?
Well, I think it's the fact that Donald Trump's is working for working class Americans. But there can be disagreement. The Republican Party is a big tent, and we're willing to have this conversation about what's best for our country. and how we can help working class Americans succeed. I don't think the solution is necessarily stronger unions, but there's reasons to have that conversation and continue that conversation. But the Republican Party is a big tent party that can take everyone in as long as we're fighting to save our country from the radical left.
Well, I don't even think it's a matter of stronger unions. It's a matter of the Republicans have set out a policy, as they have here in Florida, of destroying unions, of trying to undermine unions. You know, you probably disagree with that, but that is the net result of what a lot of the legislation has been here and across the country, is to undermine and weaken unions.
Well, I think in Florida, they want the unions to represent the class of people that they're representing. If you only represent 30% of a group, are you really representative of the whole group?
You mentioned earlier, you know, if Joe Biden is the nominee, where do you think that stands right now? You know, I realize your focus on what's taking place there in Milwaukee, but I'm sure you're not deaf to all the continued controversy swirling in the Democratic Party over whether or not Joe Biden should remain, you know, between Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries, Nancy Pelosi, all suggesting that you know, if he stays on the ticket, they're going to lose the House, the Senate, and on down the line. There seems to be momentum's continuing to grow to get Joe Biden off the ticket. Obviously, I'm assuming you would rather have Joe Biden at the top of the Democratic ticket.
Well, let me start off with saying we'll beat any Democrat that comes at us. But let me say this. The Democrats have talked about election integrity and criticized us for not accepting election results. Joe Biden is the Democrat nominee because he won every primary. For them to try to kick him off now is disingenuous. But we'll beat any Democrat that they throw at us, from Kamala Harris to Gavin Newsom, from the failed state of California. We'll take anybody that they throw at us.
All right. You know, I want to go back to J.D. Vance, and I realize often the vice president's positions do not matter as much once they become part of the ticket. But, you know, if Kamala Harris does end up becoming the Democratic nominee, you can expect this race to be recast on issues of women's rights, women's issues, abortion rights, those sorts of things. And at that point, J.D. Vance could become a real liability on the ticket, since he opposes abortion and opposes even exceptions in instances of rape and incest.
Listen, I think the American people are focused on three issues: inflation, the border, and the economy. Everything else is noise. You see that those issues don't matter when you look at polling. So right now we have a failed administration that left our border open, let people kill people in America. Illegal aliens are killing people in America, and the world is on fire. Just pose that against Donald Trump's 4 years of success. The record is easy. The American people are going to make an easy choice in November, and we're going to win this election big.
I want to take a step back for a second, because we haven't had a chance yet to talk about the events in Pennsylvania and in Butler, Pennsylvania. Talk to me about your reaction to what occurred, how you heard about it. I'm guessing you might have been in Milwaukee at the time already, and just what went through your mind as all of that has unfolded, both at the time and then in the ensuing days.
So we were at a Brewers game, actually, in Milwaukee. Someone showed me a phone. We turned on the news, saw it happen. But I think it shows the dangerous rhetoric that the radical left has used against President Trump. They called him a threat to democracy. They've called him all these things. And the reality of that is that's what led up to this. But what you've seen is our movement has only gone stronger. The Republican Party has only gotten stronger. And people are more focused to win in November, because we don't want to tolerate that kind of violence. That's not what our founders envisioned. And we're ready to take our country back so we can move it forward.
Well, you're laying it at the feet of the rhetoric of the left, as you sort of were describing it. There is still, again, we're taping this Thursday morning, there is no indication of what the motivations of the shooter was, whether or not it was because of anything that he heard or absorbed. I've seen some reporting about how he was in his Google search history looking for not just Trump events, but Joe Biden events. Could it just not be that this was a troubled young man looking for some sort of notoriety by either attacking Donald Trump or, for that matter, may have been attacking Joe Biden if he had been in Pennsylvania that day.
Yeah, I don't want to talk about the shooter's motivation, but what I will say is when you call the Republican nominee for the presidency of the United States a threat to democracy, you're setting the stage for this kind of violence.
Can you say that his policies are a threat to democracy?
No, I don't think his policies are. I think that the left has gaslit America for so long. That's why their party is crumbling. The foundations of the Democratic Party are crumbling because they've gaslit America to think that they're working for them. And it's the political elites, like they're trying to do right now, and manipulate who the nominee is after the people have voted. And they are undermining America. And right now, you're seeing the American people rallying behind President Trump. And he's going to win big in November because of that.
All right. I want to just move briefly on to another subject. We did some reporting about a week and a half ago about the hemp industry, and this came on the heels of Governor Ron DeSantis' veto of a bill that would have severely regulated and all but maybe ruined or ended the hemp hemp industry here in Florida. The governor vetoed that bill, and in subsequent messages, and you and I have talked about this already off camera, that there was these text messages among hemp industry leaders saying that our part of the bargain is that we've got to raise $5 million for the Republican Party of Florida. Let me just sort of ask you bluntly here, and then to address the issue overall. Was there a deal to veto the hemp bill in return for donations to the Republican Party of Florida?
There was absolutely zero deal. What I will tell you is the governor vetoed a bill that harms small businesses. And this governor has been in favor of small businesses his entire term in office. So yes, small businesses that are involved in hemp are interested in defeating a constitutional amendment. The Republican Party of Florida took a position far before this, opposing the constitutional amendment. And we welcome any donor who wants to give money to advance our causes. And in this case, we're allied in the fact that we're opposing the amendment.
Have they hit their $5 million yet?
I'm not going to talk about finances until it comes out in my report, but I think there's a lot of donors to the Republican Party. We're doing exceedingly well in fundraising, and people are going to see a revitalization in the Republican Party on all fronts.
When we come back, there was a major development this week in the fight to ensure abortion rights in Florida. I'll tell you what it is when we come back. Stay with us. Welcome back. Abortion remains the defining issue on the ballot in Florida this November. Amendment 4 would guarantee a woman's right to have an abortion up to the moment of viability, which is about 24 weeks. In other words, it would take Florida back to what we had during Roe versus Wade. But Governor Ron DeSantis is doing everything he can to fight the amendment and is using some bureaucratic tricks to try to confuse voters. I spoke to Democratic State Senator Lauren Book about what the governor is up to.
This last Monday, the Florida Estimating Conference met to agree to some language that surrounds the Amendment 4 ballot initiative. It does this with all ballot initiatives, and it talks about the fiscal impact of this amendment passing, should it pass, on the state. It is done all the time. It is done every time initiatives come on the ballot. It will come along with some of that ballot language that is our language that came before the Supreme Court. This time, however, it was a very interesting hearing. It was an 8-hour hearing where you really got some interesting arguments around the fiscal impact of this amendment passing. What's important to note, and red flags should be all over the place for everyone. Amy Baker, who you have paid attention to, we have paid attention to at the legislature for many, many, many years, under many different administrations, Republicans, mostly for the last decades of time, right? Said she wouldn't sign this statement that came from the estimating conference that was put together this week because she thought it was too far afield and too political, really, to go along with this ballot initiative. They made 3 arguments. The governor's office made 3 arguments that we can kind of go through. But real red flags should be going up about that statement and where we're going.
So let me just jump in here. So essentially this is language that the voter will see when they go into the voting booth that suggests that if they pass Amendment 4, there could be severe, dire economic consequences to doing this. And this is the language that's being put on there by the Revenue Estimating Committee, a committee that nobody has ever heard of. Now, let's just talk about the committee for a second. Who appoints the members on that committee?
Well, there's one from the House, one from the Senate. There's Amy Baker, the chief economist in our state, and then somebody who is from the governor's office. In this case, Chris Spencer, who I happen to have a tremendous amount of respect for, worked in the Senate with colleagues of ours. And I think that he does a great job. But in this case, I don't agree with the position of the governor's office and the arguments that they were making. And I think it's quite dangerous when they are using their political thumb and weight on something that isn't political. And why I applaud Amy Baker, our chief economist in the state, for not signing this statement, because it is too far afield.
It essentially argues that because if the amendment passes, there may be litigation, there's no way to tell how expensive that litigation is going to be. And by the way, there's litigation surrounding every amendment, because it's always about how you then implement the amendment, how you move forward with it. Has language like this ever been tacked on to any amendment before?
No, and quite frankly, we're used to this in the legislature. You put a high fiscal impact or an indeterminate fiscal statement when there's a bill that comes out that they don't like, or you see that quite a bit. And actually, they made three arguments. One is that litigation costs that you mentioned, Jim. And that's true. Litigation comes with everything. Quite frankly, if Amendment 4 passed, that would really decrease the amount of litigation that comes, because it's just restoring the law of the land that has existed in Florida for 50 plus years. It should really decrease some of that litigation. But let's also be really honest here. The governor's office and the governor had never shied away from litigation costs. Just ask the migrants he sent to Martha's Vineyard, quite frankly. And every year within the budget, we set aside millions and millions of dollars for litigation. They also made the argument that could or should, in some time from now, somebody challenge the law and sue to have Medicaid cover abortions, that we would have to cover the cost of abortions, that Medicaid would somehow have to cover the cost of abortion. That has never happened. That's not the case before, not the case now. That is a huge far afield argument that was made on top of another argument that is lost revenue, that the population growth would slow so much that it would have a severe fiscal impact on local and state governments.
Wait a second, the population growth would slow because of all the abortions?
Correct. That was the argument that was made.
Wait a second. So many babies would be killed, in other words, so many fetuses would die, that the state's population would be severely impacted and therefore would cost the state money at some indeterminate time in the future. That's the argument?
That is correct. Those were the three arguments that were made by the governor's office. And again, when you think about the ridiculousness of that, it is over the top. As the former chair of Children and Family Services, I can tell you we have a system that is already severely overburdened. Even if you went down the path of that argument, let's go down that path for a second. An abortion is a one-time, very small cost compared to relative to a lifetime of services that would be in need here. And they outlined that, and they talked through some of that. Department of Justice, Children and Families, the Department of Health, Department of Education. I mean, we really need to think about the totality and the ridiculousness and somersaults that went into something that you point out at the very beginning of our conversation here, something that is in the basement of the Capitol that nobody ever covers or nobody ever talks about. This was a very thumb heavy governor's office presence on something that shouldn't be. The proponents of Amendment 4 did challenge the statement in court on Wednesday. That was overturned Wednesday morning, I believe. And so we'll see where this goes. But again, I think that our chief economist not signing off on this language and this statement really does tell us where we should and what we should be looking at.
I noticed that the governor continues to spew misinformation about the intentions of the ballot by repeatedly going public and saying if this amendment passes, it would allow abortions even after the child is born, right up to the moment of birth and the seconds thereafter.
Has never
That is
happened.
not true, right?
It has never happened, was never the law of the land, was never a case. It has never happened. It does not happen. That is not reality. And so you can't have these conversations about things that could potentially happen in a world that is not the case. But let's talk about some real things, real facts. Women having access to reproductive health and freedom has allowed women to achieve higher levels of education, great jobs, and that is a true economic reality. When we talk about the true economic reality, we're going back to what this is really supposed to be about. This is about freedom. This is about women having a right to choose what happens to their body, regardless of what this fiscal impact statement says. I know and I believe that people across the state of Florida, we have met Republicans, independents, and Democrats alike, want to give women the right to choose what happens to their body, the medical freedom to decide what happens to them. It has been stripped from them. I have heard some terrible stories. You and I have talked about some of the very scary realities that have existed now for women under this 6-week ban. I believe and I know that as we get closer to November, we're going to hear from some of those women and some of the stories that have come out since this terrible ban has come into play. And people across the state of Florida are going to make sure that women have a right to choose what happens to their bodies come November.
This really doesn't need to be a partisan issue, does it?
It's really not. I have talked to Republican women, men across the state of Florida. These are MAGA Trumpsters. I have supporters of Governor DeSantis who are going to vote yes on Amendment 4 because they believe that women have the right to choose what happens to their bodies. I have Republican voters that are no on 3 and yes on 4. We have validators that are going to come out and speak to those voters individually because we know that across the board, people believe that the legislature has gone far too far in taking away a woman's right to decide what happens to their body. Again, you look at it in terms of wanted, anticipated pregnancies. What has this done? This has put women in harm's way in countless ways. But I'll go back to things that you and I have talked about. There are women that are being sent to sit in their cars to develop sepsis-like symptoms before they can get appropriate health care to get a DNC or an abortion because their pregnancy is no longer viable past 6 weeks in a day. This is insanity. This is third world. We live in the greatest state that I believe in the country, and women are being treated like less than. And I can't even imagine that we're in the state that we're in, but we are. And we're all going to fight very hard to make sure that come November, that is not the reality for women throughout the state of Florida.
We'll be right back. If you have any thoughts or comments, feel free to contact me at jdefede@cbs.com. I do enjoy hearing from you. Well, that's all the time we have. We'll be back again next week. Thanks again for watching, and enjoy the rest of your day.